if you've ever looked up London online, you'll find two groups of people. One group that really loves London, thinks it is just like one of the best cities on planet Earth, somewhere that everybody has to visit at least once in their lifetime. But you'll also find a group that absolutely hates London and has nothing but complaints. And I spent a month there, and I have a lot of thoughts. And some important distinctions to make as well, because I think some of the different opinions come from different groups of people based on if they're actually living there versus if they're a tourist and when they were there. So if you're new here, hi, my name's Camden. I move to a new country every single month. Been doing that for a while. And I do have some strong thoughts on London, and we're going to work through these. So I think one of the important distinctions is tourists versus actually living in London. I myself am kind of in the middle there because I really couldn't say that I lived in London, like it was for a month, but I'm also not your typical traveler in that I got a lot more time than most people would have the opportunity to have in London. So let's talk from the tourist perspective first and talk about some of the things that they love. I think there are a lot of reasons for this, but one thing that people love about London is it's comfortable. It meets expectations, and this is coming from the lens of an American, and I think this is the viewpoint of a lot of Americans, is it is comfortable because we know about it. In the American education system, you don't get exposed to a lot of other countries. The UK is kind of the one exception, maybe France as well. Like when you talk to most Americans, France and London, maybe Rome, those are going to be the three cities in Europe that they've realistically heard about, have some opinions on, have some expectations. And because London is English speaking, because we see it in media, it's easier to create that perception. And in a lot of ways, London meets expectations in that way. When you go, I found that my perception wasn't too far off. What you see in the movies isn't too far off. The buses really do look like they look. The taxis look how you expect them to. The city just kind of feels how you would anticipate it being. I don't know if that's true for people in other countries, and I assume it is because, once again, I'm deriving a lot of that from the media exposure that we get. And I recognize that it's not just the US who learns about the UK, the whole world gets a lot of that. So if you're from another country, I'd be curious to hear your perspective. And if you are somebody who lives in the UK or London, I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on anything that you think I have right or wrong in this. But I think it's comfortable because of that. You have an idea of what to expect, and that makes international travel less scary. When you get to a place and people are speaking the same language, that makes things less scary. And for Americans, the infrastructure is most similar to what you'll find in US cities. In some ways, I found myself comfortable, but also I want something different. I was hoping to get more of a cultural shock. And I didn't expect to have a huge one in London, but it was even more comfortable than I anticipated. And I think that's because of the similarities that it has to some other big US cities that I grew up around. So I think that's one thing that tourists really like, is for people who are traveling, it is comfortable. I think another thing that they like is London is obviously a huge city with so much to offer. I mean, there's something for everybody. And I think a lot of tourists make the mistake of thinking, I'm going to go to London for a couple of days. Even in a full month of being in London, I barely scratched the surface. I mean, there's just so much to do, so much that the city has to offer, so many wonderful things that it has. And those are all true. If you're a history buff, if you like the UK culture, I mean, there's just endless things to explore in London, and that is all very true. I want to talk about some of the things that people don't love, though, and some of the things that I didn't love. And one of those is a way that it's similar to the US in what I'll call kind of the work culture. In London, it definitely feels, compared to the rest of Europe, that people are very much kind of bought into that idea of work. That is the purpose of life. Things move quickly. You're focused on career, focused on maximizing money. I get it coming from the US culture. And that is one of the things that I really enjoy about spending so much time in Europe and other places in the world, is getting away from that sense of the US culture. And obviously the UK is not that. So that was something that I didn't love. But again, that's not necessarily a con. It's just a way that it's similar to the US. But I think some people have very strong feelings about that. But I want to talk about some other ways that some pieces of this kind of play out. I think one critique of London that you hear a lot of people say is the expensive nature. And that is true. It is expensive as all get out, and I felt that the whole time that I was there. And one of the biggest ways that I like to kind of explain this, I made a video, like I do with most destinations, of just first-timer tips, things that you're going to want to know before you go. And one of the things I talked about in London is it meets expectations in the food not being great. And I got a lot of pushback from locals in that, and I appreciate that. That's part of what I love, and especially in this series, is people do a really great job in the comment sections, bouncing ideas off of one another, and I hope that this is another of those opportunities. So with the food, here's what I mean by that, and I'll stand by my initial take. There is great food in London if you know where to look. And, big asterisk there, and you have the money to pay for that high quality food. And that is similar to the US, in that if you were in a city, let's say like Los Angeles, like New York, there is going to be fantastic food. But if you are looking for healthy, high quality food, you're going to have to pay for it. So much so that for, let's say, the average person, it's going to be well out of reach. And I think that is similar, or at least that was my experience in London. There was plenty of good food, but you really had to pay up. I found that the mid-tier and low-tier food was one of two things. Either one, just straight up not good, or two, it just wasn't healthy. It was that same preservatives diet that we find like in the US. Didn't seem healthy, didn't sit right, just wasn't good, wasn't what I think a lot of Americans perceive European countries to have, in that, hey, when I go to Europe, it's so crazy because I can eat bread for the first time and my stomach doesn't hurt. I can eat cheese and strangely my stomach doesn't hurt like it does in the US. You find that you can eat things because the things just aren't ultra processed, and that's what I associate a lot of the rest of Europe with. I didn't feel that way in the UK. I felt like it was harder, or there's just a higher bar to get that healthy quality food. So it's not to say that the quality isn't there, but I do think it's out of reach for a lot of people. And as a tourist, you might interact with that, you might not, right? Some tourists are going to go and say, hey, I'm on vacation, I'm here to spend whatever, I'll figure out, my budget when I get back home. Then you might not notice it. You might have a great time eating and think everything is wonderful. If you're more of that budget traveler, you might feel that a bit more. If you're somebody who's living in London, I imagine you're going to feel that a heck of a lot more. And this is where I'd love to hear from you locals. Maybe you guys are great at finding those spots. I typically pride myself on being somebody who is able to find good food. It's one of the main reasons I travel. I love learning about different cultures through food. I think there's just a lot that you can tell. And London is really cool because there's so much diversity there, so many different types of cuisines that you can find so much of it. But I found the cost and quality to be consistent throughout in my short-lived experience. So if there's somewhere else in town that I should be eating and looking for things, and where you'd recommend tourists go to avoid all the tourist traps, please let us know, because I would love to have that information so I can use it during my next visit. But I did have that gripe with the food. I want to talk about a couple other pieces. One, I think it's important to note that when tourists think of London, and when I'm referring to London, I'm talking about central, what I'd call as an American downtown London. And I get that in the UK you wouldn't necessarily call it that, but London is huge, right? And there's a lot of different boroughs, a lot of different areas that are technically all considered London. I'm talking about what tourists think of, which is that central London, where I was around, and I stayed for that month near Tower Bridge. So that gives you some idea of kind of the experience and what I was getting. I think one of the great parts about London, before we jump back into some of the things that I didn't love so much. The public transportation really is special and very unique in that it's robust. It'll get you wherever you need to get to. And that's great because taxi drivers are awesome. They're fun to talk to, but it is a nightmare, right? Like, the city was not built for as many people as are living in it now and as that are visiting. So if you try to take a taxi, you're going to be sitting in traffic. That's true in most cities around the world, right? London is no different, but they really do have exceptional public transportation. I loved using the tube. I found it really easy to use. I did find it a bit expensive. Again, that probably comes because I was on the US dollar and the exchange rate, so on and so forth, but I did find it to be a little bit more expensive in terms of public transportation costs compared to other cities around the world, but hey, that's what it is. You probably know going into it that London is not a budget traveler's, destination, but I love the accessibility that the tube and the rest of the public transportation system provides. One of the things that I think some people might push back on in London is some people say that it's great for walking, and I'm somebody who I hate being in the car. I will walk if I can. That's option one. Biking is number two. Public transportation number three for me. I did a lot of walking in London, but things are so spread out that it's like after a while, you're probably going to want to utilize the public transportation. So I didn't find that it was the most walkable city. Not to say that it can't be done, but the distances are just so much further than other European cities that your average US tourist, they're not going to walk, from point A to point B in London. Unless they're staying in the same little area, you're going to be needing to get across town because, again, London has so much to offer. So keep that in mind. That it is both a pro and a con. It's robust. It will get you where you need to get, but it is also a bit expensive, and you will have to do some of that navigating. I think one of the things that I really didn't enjoy and struggled navigating is the drinking culture. And if you've watched any of my videos before, you might have caught that I'm just not a big drinker. It's not me. I will have a drink every now and then if there is a special bar, special occasion. Sure, I'll go. I'll test it out. But one of the things that I think most people have the perception about London and the UK in general is that there's drinking culture, right? And that is true. And of course, I wanted to take part of that. I try to immerse myself as much in the culture as I possibly can in a safe way. But one of the things that Sarah and I really struggled with in our time in London was navigating that drinking culture. For a couple of reasons. One, there really seemed to be an emphasis on binge drinking. And before you say binge drinking, like, aren't you just talking about America? Yes, I know that that's an issue in the US as well, but this was different. It felt different. People really seemed to enjoy getting their drink on and didn't necessarily know when to stop. And it led to a lot of situations where we just didn't feel safe in the areas that we were, especially at certain points in the night, because people were just beyond being able to keep control of themselves. And even if you weren't outside, like when we were in our little apartment, throughout the night at like all hours, 2, 3, 4 a.m., you heard people just yelling, throwing bottles, just kind of being loud and obnoxious, just drunk people. And I get that happens. That was something that we didn't love. And being the people who aren't big drinkers wasn't something that we really enjoyed, not something that we were really looking for. And in terms of connecting with other young people in the city, we found that most people, not all, but most people really take part in that culture. So it was just harder for us to break out of that tourist shell and interact with locals when you don't live that same lifestyle. And that's okay, right? It's not not judging, not saying that their way is wrong. It's just not the same. So you might find that if drinking culture isn't a part of your identity, isn't kind of what you're into, it might be a little bit more difficult. Now, that's not to say that you can't find people who aren't drinking, but I found it fascinating to watch how the drinking culture kind of plays out. And I don't know if this is true. Locals tell me, I had 2 locals tell me, yeah, it's funny, we don't really eat our calories, we drink our calories. And I don't know if that's because food prices are high or if people really just love drinking, that much. But one of the things that was very interesting walking around like the business district is like by mid-afternoon, all the business guys aren't up in the offices anymore. They're downstairs drinking, like outside, at these, just outside all the pubs. And I found this all over the city, and in ways that, again, you just don't necessarily expect to see it. A lot of like street drinking. Like, yes, you have the pub, but then you have outside the pub, and we were there in a decent weather month, so people were all out, kind of like on the sidewalk and like even bleeding into the street, which was just interesting to interact with. So I'd love to know from a local perspective if I have that accurate, or if that was just a skewed experience there. But that was my experience. One of the other things that I think you hear about that I didn't necessarily find true is a lot of people talk about Londoners being, I don't know, just a bit rude, put offish. I didn't quite find that. I definitely think that people minded their own business. People weren't going to go out of their way to talk to you. But I had some really lovely conversations with people of all ages in London, and I really did enjoy that and did have some really good conversations as well. So I think that might be a misperception, is that Londoners aren't all mean. that just wasn't my experience. I really enjoyed talking to the people. But like any destination, when you're traveling somewhere, you probably want to know what you're actually seeking to get out of the experience. And I think in some ways people are going to love London if they know what they're hoping to get. If you're looking for just that comfortable experience, if you're wanting great museums, if you're wanting access to a lot of different types of cuisines, regardless of price point, if you're wanting access to great, theater, just lots to do, being in that vibrant city, you're probably going to love London. I mean, it really is special in those ways. Just the history and the infrastructure is really beautiful. I mean, it's not lost on you. It's like when you're in Rome or Paris, you can feel it. But at the same time, it is a big city that has city problems. Shocker. It is a place that is very expensive. And if you could wait to go to London until you really have the money to enjoy it in the way that you're hoping to, whatever that is, I would recommend it, because I do think that is a very real pain point, for folks. If it's the place that you're going and wanting to be able to just like walk around, you can do it, but again, like, it's probably a place that you're going to have to pony up a bit and be taking public transportation and maybe some of the taxis, buses, because it is really spread out. You have to know what you want to get what you want out of that experience. I will say that I understand where people are coming from when they say that London is maybe overrated, because just like with any place that the media portrays, media loves to portray places in like the glamorous, the magic ways, and that can exist, but it often means disregarding and just like not giving any time of day to some of the things that aren't all glamorous. And because London is a city, no city is fully glamorous, and London is no exception to that. So I think a lot of people are expecting nothing but great, then are hit with, oh shoot, this is really, really expensive, and oh, I didn't necessarily do my research and I don't know how to get the most out of this city. And I was probably guilty of that. London is not one of my favorite cities. I recognize that it is an incredibly special city in the world, but it was not one of my favorites. I definitely will go back, especially for the food, because if you guys give me food recommendations, I'm gonna go and try them. But it really seems to be one of those cities that you just need to know what you're looking for ahead of time. Otherwise, you might not love it. And for, again, the American or the Australian people who speak English and are looking for that comfortable experience, You're definitely going to find that in London, but I don't think anybody should go to London with the expectation that you're going to have any major culture shock, have yourself stretched as a person like you might have the opportunity in other places. And that all just comes with staying in your comfort zone, right? When you travel to destinations that are completely new, that challenge you culturally, where you're uncomfortable the whole time, I find that that's where the most growing as a person happens. And obviously that's not necessarily going to happen in London, but it doesn't need to. It all depends on what you're looking for. So I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think I have right or wrong on London, but those are just a few of my thoughts. And I know I didn't even touch on time spent up north in Scotland and traveling around the rest of the UK. There's plenty of wonderful stuff, to see, but I do recognize that there are a wide range of opinions. So I want to hear yours. Leave them in the comment section down below. And if you do want to watch some of those first timer tips, go ahead and click on this video right here because I've got you covered. So I hope this was all helpful, and we'll catch you guys next time.